Hey, good morning folks. Rick here from LaLa Farm. About 3 years ago or so, when we started raising chickens, we had no experience. We went into it informed but uneducated. We had to figure out issues with productivity, issues with feed, issues with just general bird health. I think we've become pretty proficient at it. That's what we're going to talk about today, is kind of feeding your birds over their life expectancy. So there's one of my beautiful Delawares right here joining me for the intro. So if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, make sure you do so. Ring that notification bell for notification of future content. So let's get to it. So we've been raising chickens for about 3 years now. During that 3-year period, we have encountered several issues we had to try to figure out. Issues related to feed, issues related to productivity, issues related to some chicken health issues. We had read lots of books. We had no experience coming into this. Had read lots of books, had read lots of posts, and got lots of opinions from other people on Facebook, on YouTube. But there is absolutely no substitute for experience. Every farm is different. To get input from a farm in Idaho or a farm in Maine, for my farm in Florida, it's probably not good. General information's fine, but we had to learn what works specifically on our farm. That's the case for all livestock. Livestock in Florida is going to be very different than in Minneapolis or New Mexico, or in Minnesota or New Mexico or California, some parts of California. So what works best on your farm is what we've had to figure out. A big part of that has been feed. Feed from the time that we get those chicks as baby chicks, 1-day-old chicks generally, all the way up to the life expectancy of that bird. How do you manage the food? That's what we're going to talk about today. So as I said, when we first got into raising chickens, we really had no idea what to expect other than what we had read, what we thought we understood we had to do. So we come to that glorious day. Every new chicken owner knows what I'm talking about, where either they go to a big box store and they get their chicks, or they get that phone call at 4:30 in the morning from their local post office saying, hey, your chicks have arrived, come and pick them up. So just like expectant parents, we were ready for our chickens. We had gone out weeks before that and got all of the equipment that we thought we needed to make sure that our chickens were perfectly cared for, or our newborn chicks. We went out and we got a heat lamp. That heat lamp with a big red ball on it, big red light in it, that heats up to hundreds of degrees. We got that. We got the chicken waterer, the biggest one that we could find, because we knew that chickens needed lots of water. So we got this big, little giant 5-gallon waterer. We got sawdust for their bedding. All three of these choices that we made, again with the best of intentions, come to be very big mistakes. I would highly recommend against using one of those gigantic heat lamps. They are very dangerous. They heat up to hundreds of degrees, but we really didn't know better. Kind of my gut was telling me with this heat lamp, this is probably not a good idea. Fortunately, nothing happened with our heat lamp, but I read stories all the time on social media about people that have burned down houses, burned down sheds, because they're using these heat lamps and the heat lamp falls or somehow catches something on fire. We don't use heat lamps any longer, except in our outside coop in the middle of winter. If we have no other option, then we might plug in the heat lamp. But generally, we're using what's called a sweeter heater, which is a low heat infrared heater that gets up. I mean, you can put your hand on the heater plate on that. It's enough to keep the birds warm, but it has very little fire risk. Next, this big waterer that we got. 5 gallons big. This is going to give them as much water as they could care for. Within days of getting our new chicks, we went out and found about half of them dead. They had either drowned or died from what we believe to probably be hypothermia. They get into the trough in those big giant waterers and can't get out, or if they do manage to get out in cold weather, they may very well die of hypothermia. In those first few weeks, it is really important to maintain that chick's body heat. We didn't know better. Lastly, we went and we got sawdust as their bedding. I mean, it's really soft, and they're going to love this sawdust. And we realized very, very quickly that a newborn chick can't tell the difference between sawdust and their chick starter feed. So what we saw very quickly is these chicks were trying to eat their bedding. So we immediately swapped out the sawdust and have used nothing but pine shavings exclusively ever since. They look very different from chick feed, and there's really no mistaking it. And they can't eat it because they're too large. So brings us up to our last issue that we really needed. We knew that our baby chicks needed to be fed, so we went and got them chick starter. You got all these different options at the feed store. Layer feed, grower feed, all different percentages, all different breeds and brands. But all the way at the end of that aisle is the chick starter. That's what we knew we wanted. So we got us some chick starter, and we just kept that bowl full of chick starter. That was probably correct. We didn't make an error on that, but we really didn't know what we were giving them. What is chick starter? What's the difference between chick starter and adult feed? Does a bird's needs change over time? The answer to all those questions is what we're going to address in this video today. Trying to explain what the nutritional needs are of birds at different phases of life, and how you may be able to best manage what kind of feed you give to your birds over their lifespan. So let's get to it. So with our first 30 or so birds, we were very meticulous with reading the instructions on the feed package. The feed package would say, I'm going to paraphrase here because I don't have that package obviously from 3 years ago, but it said something to the effect of, as soon as your chicks begin to lay eggs, emphasis on the word chicks, as soon as your chicks begin to lay eggs, then immediately swap them over to a layer feed. Okay, now that seems pretty straightforward, but what does that sentence really mean? We thought we were interpreting it correctly. So when we first got when our hens first started laying, the directions clearly say hens in the plural. So we had our first hen begin laying, and we said, well, all of them have to begin laying. Well, what we didn't realize is that hen is going to start laying an egg every 1-2 days, very early. And as soon as they start laying an egg, the amount of energy that it takes to lay that egg metabolically in terms of protein and calcium is extremely high. So when your chicks first start laying, that is the sign, generally about 20 weeks, that you need to start transitioning them, if not to transition them entirely, to a layer feed. That's Doofus, he's coming to welcome me in the morning. Need to start transitioning them to a layer or a grower feed. The nutritional composition of those feeds are different from chick starter. We're going to talk more about that. So what forced us to address this issue of when do you start making this transition happened with our very first batch of laying hens. So within days of coming home to our new egg laying hens, we come home to one that was in obvious distress. She was not able to walk. She just sat on the bottom of the nest, or on the bottom of the coop floor. Her beak was open, looked like she was panting. Her chest was coming up and down very quickly. And even from our limited experience, we knew this probably wasn't right. This wasn't normal. She wasn't behaving as the other hens were. We did not know what that was. We ultimately felt that she was suffering and ended up putting her down. Very quickly, was more of a panic decision than anything, because we don't want any of our animals to ever suffer. They are pets, or they're not pets, they are livestock first, but we spend a lot of time with them. We love each one of them, whether that's a bird or a goat, but ultimately we realize that they are not pets. They're livestock, and they are here for a production purpose, whether that purpose is laying eggs for us to sell or for us to harvest as our own meat, or one of our goats, whether they are going to sale for another breeder or they're going to a sale barn for income related to goat meat. They're all here for a purpose. We did not want her to suffer. We put her down. We later learned within days that what was probably wrong with this hen was that she was egg bound. We're going to come back to that in a bit when we start talking about layer feed. When we look at the topic of chicken nutrition, it really isn't all that complicated. I'm going to make this probably 20-minute video or longer on chicken nutrition, but it's really not all that complicated. It's really a function of two things. Number one, their age, and two, how does their nutritional needs vary and change over the course of the year? It does. Daylight hours, temperature, all tend to change what the nutritional availability is for natural forage or natural scratching, and what might need to be supplemented through grain feed. So that's kind of where we're going with this. So let's start with a day-old chick. Once a chick is born, for approximately 48 hours, they are able to sustain themselves on the yolk that they were able to absorb just prior to hatching from the egg. That's why we can receive shipments of day-old chicks via mail order as long as those chicks arrive within 2 days, because they don't need the food and the water necessarily that can come from all of the nutrients that that is available through the yolk that they absorb as a chick inside of that egg. Once they're born, though, it's important that they are then introduced as soon as possible to their chick starter as well as a water source. So we've got other videos that we can show you. Most recently, the one with the Cornish cross, where we've installed our new chicks. Now, this doesn't matter whether it's a meat bird or a layer bird or a grower or a layer. The nutritional demands, the nutritional needs during these first few critical weeks is really the same. We start them on the same feed. When we take them out of the box, we dip their head in the water to introduce them to the water source. Keep in mind, they have never drank water prior to us dipping their head in that. And immediately they realize that that's a need for them, so they will begin drinking immediately. They learn that very quickly. Also, we will then take them over and sit them beside the feeder that has their chick starter in it. They naturally peck, so they will begin pecking at that feed very quickly and learn very quickly that has nutritional value to them. So that's how we introduce them. Unless that newborn chick is being brooded by a hen, meaning she is sitting on those chicks for the first few weeks, she may be providing them some nutrition, but that's usually in most of the homesteads that I watch on YouTube, or even the case on our farm, on LaLa Farm. We don't have hens hatching out their eggs. When we want to hatch eggs, we stick them into the incubator, we hatch them out, we then stick them into our brooder, and then they transition from our brooder to our grow out pen and ultimately into one of a couple of flocks, whether to our meat flock or to our eggs. It's important to keep in mind, though, unless that hen is brooding that baby, all of their nutritional intake comes from the ration that we provide to them, 100% of it. So a hen with poor nutrition from the get-go is not going to perform well. They're going to be underdeveloped when the time ultimately comes to make the decision. Are they going to go into a grower flock for processing into meat, or are they ultimately going to be joined into our laying flock? So what exactly is a chick starter feed? Chick starter feed, generally speaking, is between a 10 and 20% protein feed with very low calcium. A high protein feed will allow that chick to begin to develop normally and quickly, and most importantly, healthy. A very young chick does not require high levels of calcium in their feed ration. That's why a chick starter has very low levels of calcium. Providing calcium, like a normal layer feed, to a newborn chick can have catastrophic long-term consequences to that newborn chick. They are not able to process the calcium as an adult bird does, as they do not have the same level of calcium need as that adult bird does. Providing your newborn chicks with too high of a level of calcium can result in weak legs, poor bone formation, kidney disease, or even failure, or ultimately even death of that young bird. So a chick ration is fed to those newborn chicks from the day that they're put into the brooder until the day that the first hen within that brooder group begins to lay. Now, that's important because when you mix different breeds of birds, for example, we very rarely, until we got up into the meat birds, did we order just one breed of chicks. So we might get an order with 5 or 6 different breeds of chicks, a few of each one. That's important because some breeds begin laying eggs earlier than others. For example, Leghorns begin laying around 20 weeks old, whereas a Moran may lay at 26 weeks or even longer. I've had one that's taken nearly 7 months to begin laying, a golden cuckoo Maran. Beautiful eggs, but it takes them a long time to get started with laying. So you don't wait until that entire brooding group is laying eggs. As soon as that first one in that group at about 20 weeks begins laying, that's when you will begin transitioning to a layer ration, if that's what they're going to be. If they're going to be meat birds, then you would transition, possibly even earlier than 20 weeks, around 10 to 15 weeks. We still use that 20 week. As soon as that first one lays an egg, that's when we're going to swap over the feed. Our meat birds probably don't get to that point. We've got a bunch of Cornish cross in right now. They're going to be processed within the next few weeks. They're going to be a total of about 12 weeks old when we process them. So they would never reach that egg laying level of maturity. So this brings me back to the chick that I talked earlier about. On our very first group of chicks that we received, when they began laying, one of them became egg bound. So what does that mean? When a chick becomes, or when a hen becomes egg bound, what that means is that they have most likely have insufficient levels of protein and or calcium in their diet, and they cannot expel that egg from the egg tract to be able to lay that egg ultimately. We didn't know about this process because we were waiting on all of our hens to begin laying, versus waiting for that very first one out of that brooding group to begin laying. So that decision that we made as chicken breeders, or raisers, I heard it called chicken tenders. So that decision as chicken tenders had catastrophic consequences for that one bird, because we ended up putting her down. We didn't know what was wrong with her, and what was wrong with her, in all probability, was a management decision that we made to keep them on a low calcium, high protein feed versus a more rounded, complete layer. So just like that, we find ourselves up in our grow-out coop, otherwise known as our front coop. Our grow-out coop is where we transition birds from the brooder. They generally will spend about 30 days in the brooder, then they will come down into the grow-out coop. That's where we're at right now. Right now we've got 25 Cornish cross in here that will probably, we've been saying this for 3 weeks now, probably be going into the chicken tractor, hopefully within the next few days, so that we can bring some white Brisset that are up in the brooder right now down into this grow-out coop. So these white Brisset went there. They've been in there about going on 2 weeks this upcoming Wednesday. So in here we have our broilers. So when we kind of talked about this earlier, but when a broiler hits a certain point, we generally keep them on chick feed. These chicks right now are still on chick feed for the reasons that we spoke about earlier. But if these were not Cornish cross we would never let grow out to 20 weeks. It would be too rough on them physically. This is a hybrid cross that just gets too large too quickly to be able to not harvest them prior to 20 weeks. Our white brisset, however, will grow out much longer than 20 weeks, so they will be in here until they start laying. White brisset, if you're not familiar with them, is a French breed of dual-purpose chicken in France. They're used primarily for meat, but they also are very good egg layers. So this is our first foray into white brisset. We've got 10 of them in our brooder right now. So for these particular birds in this grow out pen, these Cornish cross, they're going to be on a high protein, low calcium chick feed for the entirety of their life. If we were to, or when we bring those Cornish cross down into here, we will have them in here for probably a month, possibly even longer than that. We've got about 40 Easter eggers right now in the incubator, so when those start hatching out, they're going to be pushed into here as well, up into the brooder. So we might have a couple of mixed breeds up there, some white brisset as well as Easter eggers up in the brooder at the same time. But nonetheless, so after the 20-week period, if they were a true meat bird that are going to be harvested, which most of them are going to be done before 20 weeks, then they would swap over to a grower type of ration. Our Cornish cross will never reach that 20-week period before they get harvested. Our white brisset, which is a dual-purpose bird, could conceivably go onto a broiler feed, but then it will adversely affect their egg production. So those, even though they are primarily, we're using them primarily as a meat bird, kind of a test bird, if you will go onto a layer feed, because we can feed them a high protein feed as well as supplemental calcium and really kind of achieve the same results. And that's kind of how we manage our flock. We're going to get more into that in a bit. So what is a grower ration? So a grower ration typically has between 16 and 20% protein and very low calcium. It is intended for birds that are not going to be egg-laying birds, but birds that are going to be harvested. So now we are back in our layer coop, which is the coop that's attached to the back of our goat barn. This is where all of our layer hens are housed. So we've got about 90 birds in here right now. So once a bird goes from our grow out coop up front, where they are probably going to be on a chick starter still until they begin laying eggs. Once they begin laying eggs, we will make the decision as to whether or not they're going to go into our egg flock or a layer flock, or they're going to be culled, meaning turned into a meat bird. Ones that underperform, ones that don't grow out the way that we anticipate we want them to, will be processed. Ones that look good, look sturdy, look hardy, are the ones that will go back into our laying flock. So at that point, we're going to start them on a layer ration, and this is the last type of ration that we're going to discuss in this video. A layer ration typically has between 15 and 18% protein and higher levels of calcium. For an adult bird, calcium is super important to make sure that you can support their metabolic health while they begin laying eggs. Keep in mind, egg production varies from breed to breed, but most of ours are in the 250 to 300 eggs per year range. Some of them, such as our leghorns, a little higher than that. Some of us, such as our golden cuckoo marrons, are lower than that, but that's typically about the range. So what we do on our farm is we vary that feed throughout the year depending upon what their production needs, depending upon what their nutritional needs are. We're going to talk a little bit about how I determine that. So if we were just read the directions on the back of a feed bag, the impression that would be provided is once your hen reaches the age of laying, begins laying or producing eggs, that she's going to remain on that layer ration for the rest of her life, essentially, that's going to be a complete nutritional solution for you. I would argue that that's absolutely not the case. It's not what we've seen. It's not what we've measured on our farm. So we vary that protein mix throughout the year, and depending upon what their needs are at any point in time, because it does change. As temperature changes, as light changes, their nutritional needs also change. So what those feedbacks don't discuss is how those nutritional values, nutritional needs will change and shift over the course of the year. Each area, just like any livestock in any part of the country, how livestock gets managed in Minnesota or New Mexico, Colorado, Maine, Portland or Oregon or Washington is different than how that might be managed in Florida. So part of the challenge, I mean, I see a lot on these different Facebook groups, YouTube videos where people give solutions to livestock problems without any context for the reality that most of the videos that people would look at are contextually different from what you may experience within the geographical region where you live. So context in terms of management of livestock is really, really, really important. We learned this most prominently with our goats. We live in Florida in a very humid, very wet, subtropical climate for most of the year. Even in the winter, it stays relatively humid, although the temperatures drop. It's very different from living in a dry heat area, middle America or up in the Northeast, where humidity might be in the 50 to 60% range. In Florida, we're always near 100%, in the 90 to 100% range. So it makes some of the management decisions that we make very different than what they might be in other parts of the country. Each farm, over the course of learning how to manage your livestock in a particular geographical area, has to address, has to learn about, has to document certain things, I would say. Temperature. What is the average temperature year-round that your livestock, in particular we're talking about chickens, need? What's the optimal temperature? Do you have more heat-tolerant breeds, or do you have more cold-tolerant breeds? Or they do well, or they thrive in both heat and cold? Ours are more heat-tolerant breeds. That's what we've tried to focus on in raising our layer flock. How many hours of daylight do you get? If you have not raised chickens in the past, you're going to realize in your very first year that during the winter months, when the daylight hours are shorter, particularly in the southern United States, your chickens begin to lay less because they have less hours of sunlight. Sunlight promotes egg laying. So that may be very different than someone raising eggs, say, in Alaska or or up in the northwest Pacific area, where they have longer days. You're closer to higher above the equator. The closer you are to the equator, the shorter those days are going to be during winter. What are the various sources of scratch protein that are in the ground? Worms, ticks, different types of insects and parasites. Because we're in a tropical climate in Florida, for most of the year, our birds have adequate, I would say more than adequate, access to protein sources that are in the ground. So the feed that we give them is supplemental. It is not their main ration for most of the year. Now that changes obviously in winter when the ground becomes colder and those insects and parasites, worms, are less prominent. They're harder for them to find. That's one reason our management approach, we chose to co-graze our chickens in the back. This coop that I'm sitting in right now is in our goat pasture. That's why we chose to make that decision, because these chickens are surrounded by goats that are constantly producing waste. That waste begins to break down. That waste begins to attract flies and other parasites, whether that be worm larvae that hatches out. The chickens then provides them a protein source, but also helps with parasite management with our goats. We use very, very few wormers on our goats, and I attribute part of that success is to LaLa's management style, but also to the fact that we co-graze our chickens with our goats. So every every single day since we began raising chickens now 3 years ago. Every day since the very first day we started getting eggs, we record how many eggs we get on that given day. And we've roughly got an estimate of how many chickens we have month to month. It's never a perfect count because we've got a lot of chickens. But I can tell you right now, between all of our egg layers, we've got about 110, and then we've got 25 Cornish cross and another 9 or 10 white brisset. So altogether, somewhere around 150 or so, which includes both of our meat and our layer flocks. But just layer flocks, I'd say it's somewhere between 100 and 110. So we can estimate each day when we get our egg count what the percentage of lay is for those for our flock on any given day of the year, so that we can compare from I think today is the 19th or July 19th of 2020. We can estimate what that percentage of lay was in July 19th of 2019. We can estimate it for 2018 as far back as 2017 on this very day. So there's going to be temperature swings, there's going to be other factors that can factor into that. But it allows us some predictive ability to determine what our egg production is going to be. Number one, because we sell all of our eggs, we produce and sell about 40 dozen eggs a week. But most importantly, or more importantly, it's for monitoring the health of our flock. If we see a significant egg production drop, it can be for a number of reasons. One of those reasons could be health issues. Another one is they're not laying in the boxes. They've gone out into the pasture and laying at the bottom of a pine tree. That's an issue. Once one starts laying an egg, the other ones will follow suit until you clear that clutch of all the eggs. We've got some other videos, such as our best nest box video and install of our traditional boxes. Well, you can check those out. We're going to put a card up here at the top so you can go check those out. But we monitor that egg production every single day to make sure that we can look at trends as they're happening very proactively, instead of a month from now figuring out, heck, we're getting a lot fewer eggs than we did last month, and then we have to come out here and try to diagnose that problem with really sketchy data. Anyone who has watched our channel for any amount of time, I love doing little experiments with our animals. And that's one, much of our management style is evidence-based, is evidence-driven. So we will test something, see if it works, and if it works, we'll continue to do it. Then we might tinker with something. This fall, for example, I'm going to be putting in a lighting system to see if we can manipulate the egg production slightly so that we can get about 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of dark every single day. They won't be on full time because the eggs or the hens do need a rest from laying. But to see if we can validate the claims that this particular lighting system produces egg or increases egg production. That's that little hen that I was holding earlier. Apparently she doesn't want me in her coop. So for most of the year, our layer flock is on a 16% layer ration. 16% has the 16% ration that we use, which is a Nutrina feed, is high in protein and high in calcium. Provides them adequate nutrition for both of those nutrients for most of the year. The reason that we keep them on the 16%, not something a little higher, is that for all of our laying flock, our birds are able to free range. They're in a true free range condition, whereas there is no fencing that keeps any of our birds contained. They roam our entire 20-acre property. They kind of stay pretty proximal to the barn because that's where most of the goats stay, and they kind of follow the goats around because they understand and learn that a lot of the protein sources that they will scratch from the ground are going to be located in proximal to those goats. So they don't wander off the property, and if they do, we lose one or two, then we lose one or two. But they are not fenced. They're not contained at all. They wander, and they have free access to feed, free access to calcium year-round. So this 16% ration strategy works very, very well. throughout the entire fall, and it works very, very well in the spring because the temperatures are not overly hot and there's plenty of protein sources for them to scratch for in the soil. During those times of the year, that percentage, what we have found is that percentage of protein ration provides adequate nutrition for them for both good egg production as well as the health. That's a really big Buff Orpington that's mad that I'm in here. Apparently there's another hen in her nesting box. So that 16% ration gives them adequate nutrition for both productive or egg production as well as overall hen health. During the summer, when it gets really hot, there's always plenty of protein in the ground, but as you know, chickens are feathered creatures, so that feathering acts as an insulation to them, so they tend to get pretty hot. So they will, in the summer, at least in Florida, their egg production drops fairly significantly. Nothing like it does in the winter, but it does drop fairly significantly. They stop eating during that period of time. For that reason, during the summer months only, or during the summer months, we will increase that ration from a 16% to a 22% layer ration with free choice calcium. Remember from earlier, when we're talking about the grower ration, is it has low levels of calcium in it. So we move them up to a 22% grower. That's the highest percentage protein feed that we could find, and then we supplement them with free choice calcium. So that gives them, even though they're eating less, they're getting more protein in their diet than if we were giving them just the 16% and they weren't eating as much. We also changed that feed to a 22% feed during the entire winter, which for us in Northeast Florida ranges from about mid-November to about mid-February. Now what I mean by that, we don't ever have snow on the ground, as you know, but we start having freezing temperatures around mid-November from time to time. Our coldest month generally is January, where we have usually a dozen or two days per month that is below freezing. So it gets pretty cold. During that same time of the year, the daylight hours begin to contract, so there are shorter days, and those are two conditions that will significantly affect egg production. So lowering temperatures increases the amount of protein that's scratchable from the ground and the amount of daylight hours, so they will get a 22% ration over the entire winter time. So why don't I just feed a 22% ration year-round with free choice calcium? Well, that's a great question. It's one that I've been trying to answer for the last 3 years, and I cannot find consistent research that continued high protein, and that's kind of the operative word here, is high protein. I'm not sure what high protein means technically, but there's adequate research that would support that too high of a protein level fed continuously to a bird can result in harm to the bird, mainly to their kidneys or obesity. I don't know what that means, too high. The highest that I've been able to find in any feed store is 22%. I know there's some YouTube videos that will feed consistently a higher protein that they mix themselves. We're not at that point. I don't have the time to mix my own feed, and at this point, nor do I have the inclination to do so. I'm not convinced that feeding a 22% ration continuously is good for the bird. That's just my opinion. I have not been able to find to date evidence, what I would consider reliable evidence, not opinion evidence, that feeding a high percentage 22% ration is good or bad for the bird. So we err on the side of being conservative on this issue, so we rotate it, cycle it 22% mainly in the winter and in the summer, and a 16% in the spring and the fall. That way, if evidence ultimately comes out that a consistently high protein is bad for the bird, then it's not going to really impact our management whatsoever, because that's what we've been doing for a couple of years now. If it ultimately finds that a high 22% protein does not harm the bird over a period of time, then what we would do is I would probably move to a 22% grower feed year-round. But right now, that's not a huge significant worry for me. I'm pretty happy with what we produce and how we produce it, given the strategy that we have for our management now. So in the end, the only thing that's really going to allow you to make some of these management decisions, in particular related to feeding, is experience. As I highlighted when we first started this video, I had read lots of books on chickens. I've got an entire shelf in my office that's dedicated to chickens. And I've read many of them. I've glanced through others. I've gotten opinions from lots of folks. And as you know, everybody's got an opinion. If you line up 10 experts in a line, you're going to have 10 different opinions. So we thought we knew what we were doing when we got into chicken tending or chicken tenders. And we did. But we made a lot of mistakes, and some of those mistakes cost some of our chickens their lives. We've gotten a lot better at that. We now ask why. We don't just blindly follow what a book says, because as I said earlier, each region, the region where you live and the environmental conditions where you live defines what your management style should look like. A book is generally written for a mass market. That mass market may or may not apply 100%. Maybe it only applies 80% or 70% to the specific geographic region where you live. So that other variance, that other 20 to 30% of variance that doesn't account for the management that's described in that book, you got to figure out on your own by figuring out what works best on your farm in your unique situation. I can't sit here and tell you that my feeding regimen, my feeding program in Florida is going to work for you in North Carolina or North Dakota or Nevada or Montana. But what I can give you in this video is insight into the things that you need to be looking at, things that ultimately will work for you within your environment on your own farm. So that you too can maximize your egg or meat production, your chicken health, and your own peace of mind. So in closing, remember, always treat others as you would like to be treated. Always remember that golden rule. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, make sure to do so. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up. If you have not rung that notification bell, please do so. Get notification of future content. So until next time, be well, my friends.